Best way to get investment is to ask for advice. The best way to get advice is to ask for investment.
China-US trade war standpoint, how do you see India is positioned at this stage?
Right now, because of the China phobia happening, India can really say, hey.
What are the kind of mistakes that first-time entrepreneurs usually do that you see?
Number one, they think they need companies fail because founders fail, because execution is everything.
What are the kind of mistakes that these people do while entering US?
Oh, there's a lot. One of the biggest mistakes, at least.
If I'm way to raising a capital from a US VC, right? We keep often hearing this that you'll have to register it in US, right?
Yes.
I want to understand your view on what should best pick up from Indian entrepreneurial style. What advice would you have for these people? US as a potential market, and they're starting from India or Southeast Asia.
Yeah. You really do need boots on the ground there, both
What are the opportunities out in US if you're building from India?
From India, the opportunity is basically that you can.
A founder who's already there in one of these incubators or accelerators within India and want to raise capital from one of these accelerators from US, right?
Yeah.
What should be the approach? How should they go about it?
It is not your idea, it's not your company, it's not how great your website or your pitch deck is, it's who you know.
If you get an opportunity to pick up founding team, right, and you have an option of 3 countries to pick up from, which 3 countries will you pick up from, and what skill set will you expect from these people?
So there's lots of different ecosystems around the world that for personal reasons people might like that area. I love India, so I want an Indian on my team.
Hi friends, welcome to another show. Today's episode is for founders and aspiring founders who are wanting to go big and global. In today's episode, we sat down with Robert Schultz, who's our first international guest, who is a founder of Masterclass, professor at Babson, and mentor at Techstar. We sat down with Robert and understood how to start a company in India and go global, how to close a deal with US customer without traveling to US, how to raise investment from international investor, why US investors ask Indian founders to register company in US before investing, and more such interesting insights during the course of this video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're looking at growth insights and business lessons from founders directly. Hi Robert, welcome onto the show, Power Up with Pradeep. You're the first international guest onto the show.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for having me, Pradeep. I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah. So Robert, I want to quickly ask, since you come from US, you're basically based out of Boston, and you see the whole of US ecosystem, and you're a mentor for a lot of startups there, and you also teach at Babson, right? With that in mind, I want to start with a question which speaks around perception of US investors and the leaders, ecosystem leaders, right, on the startups in India, right, versus startups in China. How is this gap? Are we closing the gap? Are we, far behind China? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think most investors, most folks, partners, etc., in the United States, we respect the intellect and the hard work and resilience of India. However, we also recognize that there's a lot of dangers, there's a lot of risks associated with that, increasingly more than what we have in the United States because of language, culture, politics, legal system, etc. Right? So while we recognize that Indians themselves have a lot of potential to plug into our ecosystem, we also recognize that there's inherent risks associated with coming to India, with doing business here, and that's probably a reality as well. However, on the other hand, we also recognize that there's an opportunity to build a bridge because, look, we're speaking in English right now.
Absolutely.
So this is a competitive advantage that India has. It's not such a foreign place for us.
Right.
Right. And so that's something that deserves to be mentioned. With regards to China, I think we don't speak their languages. They need to speak English. Increasingly more, there are more Chinese students that have really good English that are coming to study in the States.
Right.
Sometimes you don't know if they're from California or if they're from China, and I think India is taking note of this.
Right.
However, there's certainly a lot of opportunities to plug into what's happening in China, and we understand the behemoth size of their economy clearly. The problem is we don't know how to do business with their government. We don't know how to do business development there, and there's also a lack of trust. because when it comes to intellectual property contracts, that kind of thing, it's thought that maybe they're larger than us and they can effectively do what they want on their own soil.
Right.
When it comes to coming to the United States, that's a different story. We are having more and more Chinese companies with different funds that are setting up shop in the United States to kind of bridge that gap.
Right.
And this is again something that Indian entrepreneurs, Indian investors, and so forth should also be taking note. Maybe emulating China in that way.
Right.
So I don't think there's a clear answer to this. I think generationally, what we're going to find is entrepreneurs are the same everywhere. We are all constricted by our ecosystems. We're all victims of our ecosystem.
Right.
The Indian economy is so noisy. It's so dynamic. There's really no way to describe it in a nutshell. It depends what state you're in. It depends the politics that are happening, et cetera. With China, I think we tend to think that we can make gross generalizations about what we think China is, and most of us have never been to China.
Okay.
So I think that deserves to be mentioned. Is folks need to get on a plane like I did and come and actually explore the ecosystem firsthand to understand what it's really like.
Right. So from a China-US trade war standpoint, how do you see India's position at this stage?
Yeah, I think India is well positioned. I think right now, because of the China phobia happening, India can really say, hey, don't forget your old friend here. Certainly there's a lot of Indians in the States who can be leveraged as intermediaries. And again, our history is important to mention.
Right.
So in terms of that, I do think that we have an opportunity, and India has an opportunity to get closer to the United States.
Right.
Also because of our politics, both Modi and Trump are in good relations, and I think that should be something that we should take advantage of as well.
Sounds good. So on the innovation side of it, right? Let's compare India, US, and China. How are these three countries, positioned at an innovation level?
Yeah, I think in the US and in India, we have democratic systems that sometimes can stifle innovation.
Mm-hmm.
In China, they can make one sweeping, policy change, and it can completely change the economy and completely open up opportunities for companies there.
Right.
We know how large these organizations are, and we understand the more autocratic nation, or not, the autocratic way the government works there.
Right.
People tend to, respect authority, and they tend to go along with it, and what other choice do they have?
Right.
While in our societies, we tend to bicker about things, and change can be quite slow.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it can prevent innovation. It just makes things a little bit more difficult, and maybe in terms of time expectations, things don't always happen in the most efficient way.
Right.
But what it does is it helps us to understand all the gaps. In terms of small organizations can be more nimble.
Right.
And in terms of, we all have strategies about what we think we can achieve as far as startups and large companies are concerned. But when you actually go out into the market and you actually see what's happening, it can be difficult for the Chinese organizations to pivot because they don't have their finger on the pulse of what's really happening.
Right.
More of a 30,000-foot view instead of having their feet firmly on the ground. And understanding, the fact that we're probably going to have to iterate, we're probably going to have to pivot, we're probably going to have to, fail a little bit before we succeed. Right. And I don't know if that's something that necessarily, Indian or Chinese investors are thinking about, and entrepreneurs are thinking about. Right. But I do know that in order, as an entrepreneur and as an entrepreneurship professor, failure is the tuition that you pay for success. So, you can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach. You really do have to get down and understand the niche economy in which we live.
Right.
The way that geopolitics play out, macro-level things. You can again have a government that can make these kind of changes, but when it comes time to actually doing business with the United States, you also have to have a familiarity with our culture as well, which gives India an advantage.
Very true. Rightly said. In fact, I see most of the Indians today are moving up the ladder in the global organizations, and we know the examples. Famously, we speak of Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, all of these guys from India grew up the ladder there. Yeah.
And that's something that, again, it's not such a foreign place for us anymore.
Right.
Maybe 20 years ago, you didn't have many Indian restaurants and such, but now if you go to the Silicon Valley or if you go to Boston, half the people there are Indian.
Awesome. So with your, being a mentor, mentoring, foreign or US companies, right? And you have also taught at NYU, Babson, and you have also mentored at Techstars,
Mhm.
and then you see some of the global companies wanting to enter US market, right?
Yeah.
So what are that so important elements that you see from a founder standpoint,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Are visibly there, in other markets,
Yeah.
like you've traveled to Spain,
Yeah.
Oman, all of this,
Yeah.
right? So how do you see from a founder standpoint, what are those differences that you see in each of these markets?
Yeah, I think there's the commercialization aspect is something that I think a lot of the not all, but more American companies recognize that you have to do customer development before you think that what you have is even novel at all.
Right.
Many of these companies are high tech. They
Mhm.
require significant R&D, and before you go and you spend any money on these companies, you need to validate the market. You need to
Yeah.
create trust with that market. And you need to have them scope out what the specs need to be so you can build a minimally viable product that they
Right.
really want.
Yeah.
Most of these companies have built something. They think they're going to bring it to the United States. They recognize that they can make a lot of money at the upside in the United States. They can charge a lot for it.
Yeah.
But they haven't scoped out the market and done their due diligence to understand if what they're doing is really novel and to build out the stakeholder support that they're going to need in order to get their early stage customers. After all, they're not a known quantity. They're foreigners. They're coming into just like if I were to come to India, people like me, but they wouldn't necessarily trust me at first glance. I would need to have my reputation established here. I would have to have introductions from the people who they trust. Right? And so ultimately it comes back to networking. It comes back to doing soft market entry without making a big commitment to come to the United States. Instead, maybe working through an intermediary to help broach these kind of conversations and really come to the truth of it. What you want is somebody who's going to be critical of your company. Yeah. You want somebody who's going to tell you how hard it's going to be and the kind of stakeholders you're going to need to engage in order to be successful. Right. It's not all rainbows and sunshine. Yeah. And it's not about developing the best technical product. It's actually, I encourage a lot of these companies to do what I call vaporware, right? And to not actually build the product until you have letters of intent from customers. Because otherwise then you've already sank money into a product that may or may not actually have any kind of traction or product market fit.
Right. So validation is critical point
it's
here.
The absolute most important thing is understanding probably sales skills is probably one of the most important skills that startup founders have. Right. Pre-selling. Understanding if what you're selling is really something that the customers want. And if you do that, by the way, if you can get some letters of intent, it actually bleeds over into the other area, which most founders think that what they need is fundraising. Yeah. Right? They think that, if only I had a venture capitalist who supported me, then my idea would be successful. Right. And I work with these companies all the time. I make introductions to them. I work with venture capitalists, and the VC wants to know what's the traction. Yeah. If you don't have any traction yet, then how do you think you're going to get investment? They know full well, because if you're not the one building out those relationships, one of your competitors is. Yeah. And that competitor might actually be an American company, maybe someone who it's not as risky for them to be in the United States. They don't have to pick up their family or their entire livelihood and come to the United States. Right. So you are up against a lot of challenges here, but again, because we speak the same language and we have a familiarity with each other's culture, I think there's an opportunity there to actually build rapport and to recognize that maybe these companies don't need to come to the United States initially. Maybe they can partner through some intermediaries there, develop the traction, and then by the time you arrive, then you actually have partners who want to see you succeed instead of coming in cold without any network whatsoever.
Get that. So essentially what you're saying is anyone wanting to start from their country and wanting to enter US, they should not keep that as a priority. They should make sure that there is a product market fit.
That's right.
And scale within the country. And once you realize that you have reached certain level is when you should look at US market, 100%, right?
100%. Right? And the cost of things in the United States is astronomical compared to the cost here. The cost is financial and it's also social. Right. Think about how important family structures are here. People tend to do the best work when they're motivated, when they have support. Right. That everything changes when you pick up and you leave and there's doubt and there's fear of failure and by the way, everything costs 10 times more. So if you're going to build a minimally viable product, American companies have known for years and Western companies have known for years that they can outsource to Indian companies. Yeah. That business process or knowledge process outsourcing, that ship has kind of sailed in terms of cost savings, but we also know that the cost of doing business here is just cheaper than doing it in the United States. So why not take advantage of that efficiency in the early stages when you go from 0 to 1 And before you make a big commitment and think that what you're doing is novel, actually do some stakeholder analysis and get that validation. So it's 100% true.
Makes sense. Makes sense. In fact, you as a managing director of MassNext, right? You would be speaking to a lot of companies, especially the life sciences ones, right?
Yeah.
And you see these companies, operate towards scaling and then wanting to enter.
Yep.
Can you give us some of the examples that you have consulted in your experience? What are the kind of mistakes that these people do while entering US, or maybe that mistake was in the start itself? If you can throw some light there.
There's a lot. One of the biggest mistakes, at least in life science, is forgetting about the life part of life sciences. Scientists are some very smart people, often medical founders, biotech leaders, etc., and they are very, very intelligent. They have a lot going on upstairs. But one thing that they don't teach in science school, and actually they don't teach at school in general, is empathy.
Okay.
So what I've seen is these founders, think that what they're solving is a science problem when what they're actually solving is a social problem. It's actually more of a communications problem.
Right.
Right. So in terms of understanding how to align stakeholders,
right.
You have academia, industry, government, and philanthropy.
Right.
All of those stakeholders have their own incentives. Academia, they have the ego of publishing and being amongst the smartest people in their field. We know what industry wants. They want revenues. They want profits. Government, they care about creating policies that promote entrepreneurship that ultimately keep them in power, and so they can get voted in every term. Right. And then the last one is philanthropy, which people tend to not know about or tend to not understand, even in the United States. So this is primarily the work that I do, is helping to de-risk the market entry to the United States by introducing them to all these different stakeholders within their specific disease. Awesome. I believe for patients and families, innovation is hope. Yeah. And we don't do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, although we live in the world and we deal with the ramifications of actions of business. Right. People actually work because there's incentives. Yeah. So rather than going in with rose-colored glasses and thinking everything's going to be rainbows and sunshine, right. I think what we need to do is to take a step back and understand that the whole world within any disease is clamoring to try to get access to these people. What are you going to do to build trust with the community that you serve?
Right. Get that. Pretty important, in fact. Yeah. So from an investor standpoint, right, startups from India and US, right, we understand the capital availability is definitely, there's no comparison between India and US. But from a Indian founder standpoint, right, if I'm way to raising a capital from a US VC, right, we keep often hearing this, that you'll have to register it in US, right?
Yes.
Can you throw light on why is this happening?
It has everything to do with the liability. There's been American companies that are in California that have infringed upon legalities and ethics, and maybe the founder wasn't properly spending the money, and then they have to prosecute that person. They have to take them to court. They have to sue them. Right. And if you're in a state, even in the United States, other than where the VC is, like they can't actually prosecute them in their home state. So they'll often even make a California company set up shop or put into their contract that they are going to be taken to court in Massachusetts court. Right? And so it has everything to do with the fear of what could happen if things go awry. And you can imagine how that fear just gets multiplied when you handle any foreign country. But I think in India, things like if you have a contract and someone doesn't pay you, what can you do about it? And so this is ultimately at the bottom, at the top of mind for most of the investors, is they have seen more of a global perspective, more of a broad perspective. They've met with many entrepreneurs. They have networks of their own friends who are also investors, and those investors are telling them, look, the best practice here is to try to keep these companies as close as possible to try to reduce any risk associated with your investment. So it is something that they're working through their peers. It's a shame because there might be a lot of bias. There might be a lot of stereotypes there. Maybe they don't have a particularly sophisticated sense of what the Indian economy is. Maybe if they did, they'd see the risk as being an opportunity. After all, risk versus reward. Once the companies come to the United States, the valuation goes up too. The valuations are bloated. So to counter the argument, I do believe that if investors were to come here and work through the right stakeholders to build that trust here and maybe take a lot of that guesswork and a lot of that risk out, investors could actually get more chances to play with the same amount of budget, because they can invest in more Indian companies for the same amount of money rather than waiting for that company to come to the United States, right?
Right.
So there's different perspectives, and mind you, there's VCs here too.
Yeah.
So the global ecosystem now is much flatter. But it is true. You're absolutely right. It is true that even in the United States, it doesn't matter if you're from Canada or what country. Even though we might speak the language and be culturally, it's more about in the court of law, where can you prosecute them?
Right. In fact, I was consulting one of the SaaS companies, and these guys look at US as a potential market, and they sell there.
Yeah.
They find it hard when they speak of having an Indian name or not having an office in US. They find it often hard to sell in US market, right? Yeah. Is it to do with also perception? Because here it's not investment; it's basically sales, right? You're using a product. As long as the product is satisfying your need, it has no direct implication of anything else, right?
Yeah.
Why are people still specific about using a US-based product? What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think many companies, Zoho and so forth, are Indian companies that people didn't even realize were Indian companies. I didn't know Zoho was an Indian company before I started using it. Before I got here, and I saw it everywhere, and I went, "Wow, I've used that. That's great." There is a perception problem there. What you hit on, though, is there's two sides of the organization. There's your sales and your front office, and then there's your back office. Right. There's nothing wrong with having your back office, your R&D center, be here, and having your English-speaking folks like me be the front office and be the people actually doing the sales and marketing for you. That's actually the model that we encourage, because it's the best of both worlds. Why encourage the very smart, creative people who got you there to pick up and move? And it's much more expensive. You've got to pay benefits. You got to do all this. The total cost of employing someone is very expensive. So I do think there's more opportunities than ever to use communication platforms, to asynchronous platforms to achieve this. But it really is a pragmatic problem, because if you have a team here, you have your dev team, and then you have your front office team, when can you meet?
Right.
When can you meet with your employees? So you will need to have a dedicated team between 8 and 7 p.m. If you're supporting a product, it might be a 24-hour support team.
Right.
So even though I know Indians are flexible and you often have to change your schedules to cater to the American timetable, I do think that is a challenge. That's something that you really have to think long and hard about. What's the company communications look like? Internal. If you have a customer complaint or something happens with an install, how do you actually respond to that in a timely manner, so that on the other side the U.S. customer doesn't see it as being a negative that you have an office in India, but more as a positive, because you're passing on that value to them. Yeah. Ultimately, it's about the level of service, the service level that you can provide to them, and if you can provide that level of service without seamlessly, then people see it as a positive that you have an office in India.
In fact, I absolutely agree with you from a standpoint of service, because point is, most of them struggle getting the entry itself.
Right.
Once you enter, you're taken care of, right? Service can be taken care of, and people work hard towards the client satisfaction. That's assured. Entry is where the struggle is, and that's where most of the founders find it very, very hard to crack that. And we keep looking at avenues, and I know some of the organizations who changed their name. Per se, if I'm Pradeep, right?
Yeah.
They changed this name to Peter or
Peter,
something like that.
I know that, the anglicized names. I'm very aware of that. I'm like, what are you doing? No, but that used to be more of a thing, and I think it's becoming less of a thing.
Okay.
But I have friends that have done that. All of a sudden on Facebook, their name is different, and I'm like, wait, you've been in the States now for 10 years, and all of a sudden you're American. Congratulations, So no, I do think that there's a perception thing there. Names. But at the same time, if you're talking about the sophisticated, some of the more dynamic economies of the United States, like the Silicon Valley or Boston, you're not foreigners in our land. It's something that we understand, that you're sustaining our university ecosystems. You're certainly making up a large amount of our workforce. And we love the fact that you're bringing your delicious food to us. and there's a lot of that's bringing us closer. It deserves to be mentioned. Culturally speaking, we're not as far away as we think.
Right. Yeah. In fact, you work at Babson, you teach at Babson, right? I know a founder who has a big chain of supermarkets here they're based out of Hyderabad.
Nice.
And they have more than 100 plus stores. One of his the elder son, is in Babson now.
Okay, I'll look him up, yes.
Yeah, you're right. So at this point, I want to ask, since we're speaking of international companies making their market, selling the product in US.
Sure.
I see some of you spoke about Zoho, right? Zoho, Freshworks, Oyo. In fact, some of these companies have made their mark in US,
right.
ecosystem. What do you think they have done right?
They have done the correct, correctly understood that you don't need to have you can have a robust, integrated, high value product without having a high price point. And there is a sense that in the States sometimes that in order for a company to get some traction in the market, they have to drop their price. Now, if you're doing something novel and it's innovative and no one's ever done it before, you should be charging a premium for that. So a lot of companies, though, because they're new and they need to break into the market, in the States anyway, they drop their price. And they're probably leaving a lot of money on the table because they're actually developing something new and differentiated that wasn't provided by, in this case, Salesforce.com and some of these other providers. And when you stack up the value proposition that Salesforce.com provides versus Zoho, maybe people don't need a Mercedes-Benz. Maybe they only need a Honda. And so in the sense that Zoho for startup entrepreneurs and for medium-sized businesses is excellent. It does everything that everything else does at a much cheaper rate, and because they have their Indian dev team doing it, they're able to get a margin that's attractive as well. This is something that I don't think you could achieve in the United States. This is a model. Okay. These are outliers in a sense, and they've been able to find their niche, and they've been able to thread that needle simply by understanding the value propositions of their competitors.
Get that.
Right, and the competition in this space is fierce, but most of us who are entrepreneurs, myself included, we don't want to spend a lot. We just want to, some like FreshBooks, for example, it's fairly inexpensive compared to a lot of the bookkeeping services that you can get.
Right.
We just want something that works, that's secure, that we can rely on, and it achieves the means that we want. We don't need all the bells and whistles.
Makes sense. So in India, we call it jugaad. Basically, frugal innovation is what I'm referring to, right? So from a frugal innovation standpoint, does this add as a strength, or will it, limit the scalability of the business? What do you think of this?
Well, frugal, it's one way to put it. The other way is to be, smart and to take small risks step by step. And that means taking small bite-sized risks that you can learn from.
Right.
Not overspending on what you think your vision is, then finding out later on that it's not what your customer wants, and in fact your baby is ugly. Right. Frugality is definitely a important trait of entrepreneurs in general. Right. Like there's this idea of bootstrapping, picking yourself up by your boots, which is technically impossible. I don't know if you've tried that before, but it's really hard to pick yourself up by your boots. But it is something that bootstrapping that we encourage people to do. In the Indian sense, it's the only way oftentimes. Right. So in the States, we might be one relationship or two relationships away from getting a small investment and getting things started. I don't know if that necessarily helps things.
Makes sense.
Right. Because it's thought that maybe your time is not being spent focusing on your product and focusing on your customer, but rather focusing on trying to find an investor. Oftentimes too early, oftentimes at a valuation that's not attractive, you're giving up equity.
Right.
So in terms of frugal innovation, you're actually following the best practices that we preach at Babson College with regard to the business model canvas.
Right.
Actually understanding what it's going to take to incrementally build value from a minimally viable product up to something that might be more robust.
Right.
So I would actually applaud that mindset, because we could certainly use a little bit more of that in the United States.
Got that. Yeah. So from a Indian founder standpoint, right? What are those 2 or 3 traits that people from here should pick up from West from building global successful companies?
Yeah, I think emotional intelligence is something that is often overlooked. My hometown attracts some of the smartest people in the world, scientists from all over the world, and yet many of these folks in their pitches, they don't ever mention anything about humanity. You might hear the word, life sciences only once, and they don't actually mention anything about the patients and families that are suffering from that disease.
Right.
It's more of a scientific exercise for them.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to actually bring it home and speak and have a narrative, a storytelling, a communication strategy that helps everyone in the room to understand that we share.
Right.
There's a togetherness to our being.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important thing. And the other thing is that God gave us 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth.
Yeah.
and we need to use them in that proportion. So I think what a lot of Indian entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general need to do is to ask better questions and to listen.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that emotional intelligence, because 99% of what an investor says might not apply, and they might criticize you. And if you're tuned out and you're not listening to that final 1%, which might be the golden nugget that you need to succeed, then you're going to miss it.
Yeah.
Right? If you're too, worried because your investor just told you that, your baby isn't as beautiful as you thought, then you're not going to be as receptive to the positive, benefits that they can provide.
Right.
You can get a lot out of people who don't love your product.
Mm.
You can use that.
Yeah.
And a resourceful entrepreneur understands that you just got free information out of a VC, for example, without having to give up any equity.
Right.
That's worth its weight in gold.
Right.
So I think that we as investors need to, or as entrepreneurs need to understand that investors are a source of information, but they're not the be all end all.
Yeah.
But it can help you to understand how should you position your value statement. How can you, what kind of slide deck, slides do you need in order to resonate with your audience?
Yeah.
Don't go in thinking that what you have is going to be set in stone, because chances are everything's going to iterate, everything's going to pivot. And if you're not listening to what these people are providing and asking better questions and knowing who to trust, and verify why, then you're going to be like a dog chasing its tail.
Yeah.
And this is where companies oftentimes burn out, because you get a little bit of investment in and you only have a short runway in order to be able to make things happen. And if an investor or someone doesn't see any traction within a short amount of time, then they leave.
Yeah.
They recognize that maybe this one isn't for me. But again, it's all about I think listening skills. I know these are soft skills.
Yeah.
Some of the smartest scientists in the world have not many soft skills, and so it's tragic, because if a scientist is able to tell a narrative that creates emotional resonance in their audience, then they can do anything they want. I don't think that what we're solving, once again, is a science problem. I think science is a form of communication in and of itself.
Get that. Conversely, on one side, we have spoken about Indian founders picking up traits from West. I want to understand your view on what should West pick up from Indian entrepreneurial style.
Wow, that frugality aspect. Man, you should see how Indians live in the United States. My friends are able to scrape by and save money, and they are buying homes now when Americans aren't buying homes. How is that possible? Like Americans born in America aren't able to save money because we're spending $20 on avocado toast or something, right? In California, things are very, very, very expensive, and yet Indians are buying homes out there in one of the world's most expensive real estate markets. Right? So there's this idea of the perception of value and your needs. What do you really need? Right? And I think that's something that we as Americans, we have a really messed up sense of what our needs really are and what luxury really is, and fashion and brands. And what we really need to understand is, what's the value for money that we're really, providing, or what do we really need? And also just what we can learn from India. There's a holistic, mindfulness.
Right.
That I think often goes overlooked here. People tend, even though this is a crazy city, Hyderabad, and there's a lot of beeping and the traffic's crazy, people are very calm.
Yeah.
People are very chill. It's very easy to talk to people. They're very approachable. I can't say the same about New York. I can't say the same about London. I can't say the same about some of these big bustling cities, but Hyderabad is booming, and yet people seem pretty chill. And I think it's because they're rooted in maybe their spirituality or in their system of belief, and they have a sort of support system behind them that allows them to be able to approach problems in ways that maybe Americans are thinking more shallowly. And I hope I don't get canceled for that, but I will. I do think that Americans sometimes think too much about the money, and we don't think holistically about maybe the implications of business and society.
Right. In fact, you in the beginning you mentioned. People back in US actually buy, real estate there. In India, this is quite common. In fact, people start earning. The first thing on anybody's head, if you're graduating and you got a job, first thing you have on mind is, when should I invest and buy a house? That's pretty common in Indians.
I think the Asian community is the highest percentage of landowners, of property owners in the United States. And it's simply because of this cultural trait of togetherness. Oftentimes folks pooling their resources together in order to, the family structure.
Right.
But I do think there's something there, and in many ways, that's a competitive advantage.
Get that. We've been speaking of capital, right? In terms of availability, right? Within, US as well, right? Or other global market at a whole.
Yeah.
We know Silicon Valley has always taken the higher seat from a,
Indeed.
capital availability and investment being given, right? Is it the same still, or is there any shift that you see happening?
Not only is there's a shift happening, it's the same and it's different.
Okay.
It's the same because the dollars are still there.
All right.
But no longer is it required to go to the Silicon Valley in order to raise money in the Silicon Valley. In fact, I saw a graphic the other day that showed, the fact that the money is coming from the Silicon Valley, but they're investing all over the world.
Right.
They're some of the most sophisticated investors, and we're talking about one of the most saturated startup markets on the planet.
Right.
So they recognize that the companies that are there are probably strong. They're probably strong entrepreneurs. They've managed to be able to survive in the United States and to be able to come to California. Maybe they've gone to some great schools, et cetera. But what about those entrepreneurs who didn't necessarily have the means to come to the United States? What about those entrepreneurs who, for ideological reasons, didn't want to come to the United States?
Right.
They're still valuable. And so California is on the forefront of investment. And I know in Boston, this is something that we love to talk about, the fact that we're the life science hub of the world, but our small ecosystem is nothing compared to California. If anything, a lot of Boston startups want to get funding from California, and that's seen as being one of the most positive things, is having investments from both coasts.
Okay, interesting.
There's other ecosystems that are emerging. Texas, the Research Triangle, and so forth. But California is still growing. Despite what you're hearing about, Tesla and Elon Musk moving and all these people moving away, people are still moving to California. It's still growing, and the cost of living is still getting more expensive.
Interesting insight. In fact, out of US, right? Where do you see most of the investment going in, other than US?
Israel.
Israel
is Startup Nation. Boston and Israel have a long-standing relationship. Their high-tech companies are second to none. Their founders are mature, battle-trained, and willing to work with the American community in a way that other countries are not. And so it gives them an unfair advantage, and that's why they're number one, right? So I think that would probably be the number one place. Number two might be, at least within biotech, you have to respect ecosystems like Switzerland and Germany and the Netherlands. Actually, the Netherlands is our oldest trading partner in the United States.
Okay.
Prior to the British, us declaring war on the British, the Dutch probably had their boats packed up and on their way because they were our oldest trading partners. They were the ones who liberalized our economy and allowed us to be able to trade with anyone other than the British, and then the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese and everyone else.
Okay.
So we have these long-standing relationships with other nations, but I think that Israel is really the top one.
This comes out as a surprise to me, honestly. I wasn't expecting Israel. I was expecting something else, some other country, but Israel is a surprise to me.
There's a familiarity there too, culturally speaking. Folks might also speak Hebrew together. They might come from the same faith, and so that really reduces a lot of the risk associated with the fact that they know each other, and they come from the same families, or there's a cultural connection there. Right, and so I do think that's probably number one. Probably number two, right now. It's hard to say where number two might come from. It's right now. I think where we're seeing a lot of companies coming from Scandinavian countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway. They're really doing a lot of great work. But all of these ecosystems are pretty small, right? So there's a lot of great companies like Spotify that have come from that ecosystem, and they've grown really large.
Yeah.
There's also countries that are pound for pound much bigger than their weight class, like Estonia. No one thinks about Estonia, but they have one of the most technological societies on the planet. So most of these economies though are pretty small. And so in sheer numbers, I don't think that they really compare. And that's why I think it's even more impressive that Israel is able to do what it does, because it's a small country. Pound for pound, they definitely fight, more than their weight class.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's emerging economies too. I was in Oman. I think a lot of these economies they have their own sovereign funds. They have a 2040 vision fund, and the fact that they recognize that in order for their economy to grow, they're going to need to collaborate more with the United States. By the way, Oman and Bahrain are the only two countries in the Middle East that have free trade agreements with the United States.
Wow.
So there's a definite important reason there to collaborate. And these are smaller ecosystems that are really just chipping away at what some of the larger ecosystems have been able to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
For years, Boston has been known as being the life science capital, but not many people understand that actually it was Germany that really seeded our biotech ecosystem. And it started with a company called Hoechst, which used to be the 5th or 6th largest pharma company in Germany, and they invested in a collaboration with Massachusetts General Hospital. I think it was back in 1981, as far back as that. So Germans were already coming to our ecosystem back before we even recognized that, that biotech was a thing. And then the number one selling drug in the world is Humira. And that initially came from BASF, the world's largest chemical company based in Germany. And they had a small pharma division, and they came to Boston. And actually the world's number one selling drug, Humira, came from collaboration with BASF. It became BASF Pharma, and then that division was acquired by Abbott and then spun out as AbbVie, which is who sells it today. So there's more than meets the eye. All our biggest employer in Boston in biotech is Takeda. They're a Japanese company. So basically, I love the biotech space because oftentimes when I go to these meetings, I'm the only American in the room in my hometown. Good parties, good cultural, good food. The Bio International Conference is coming up, and it's the biggest biotech conference in the world. It's one of my favorite events.
Awesome. In fact, I realize Boston also has this unique advantage of Harvard and MIT being there in that city, right? That definitely adds more fuel to its growth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, they are. I can't hate on Harvard because they're a magnet for people coming to my hometown.
Yeah.
There's ideological differences between those two schools of what they consider to be the qualities that they have in their students. But you can't ignore the power of Harvard University.
Oh yeah. In fact, back in the time when we speak of MBA, it's always that Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Wharton, and these come in that ranking, right? And especially if you're speaking of Ivy League, then Harvard stands on the top, and then rest of it follows it. Again, depending on specialization, people prioritize their college, but yes, there is that advantage for Boston for sure.
And do you know why? Do you know how to tell whether or not someone went to Harvard?
Sorry, I couldn't get this.
When someone goes to Harvard, how do you know whether or not they went to Harvard? Do you know how to find out? They tell you. They tell you, and that's the joke. Basically, they tell you, and so everyone usually knows when someone went to Harvard because they went to Harvard. They paid into that club, and that's how they set the tone of the conversation. Is I went to Harvard. They'll walk in with a Harvard sweatshirt on. They'll mention, I went to that school across the river over there in Cambridge. Sometimes they'll use like a code language for it, but they will not hesitate to mention that they went to one of these institutions because it changes the conversation.
Yeah, the power shift happens.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yep, and there are other great schools in the Boston area. Babson is now ranked number 2 behind Princeton overall in all schools. My alma mater is Northeastern University. All of my students, I teach biotech enterprise there. All of my students, almost all of them are from India, and all of them have gone to the IITs. And it's the top program in the country for cooperative education. So there are schools that have their own value propositions, but those two big brand names are the big dogs in town for sure.
Yeah. I think since we're speaking of schools, I want to speak of the accelerators that play a big role in the whole startup ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
When we speak of accelerator, especially from an Indian context, we see Y Combinator.
Right.
In fact, I personally follow Y Combinator a lot, and I try learning a lot from those conversations. We have other ecosystems that I follow from India, but then from US, I look at Y Combinator. But I know there is Techstar, there is Plug and Play, all of these are there. I want to understand your perspective on their role from a fundraising standpoint or from a start standpoint. What do they add in terms of value for a founder?
Sure. Sure. I think in terms of accelerators and incubators, people oftentimes refer to these two things in one and the same, but they're different.
Okay.
Some of these accelerators, incubators, some of them take equity, and some of them do not. So Techstars takes equity, Y Combinator, these kind of organizations. But then when you have like a Mass Challenge, for example, which was founded in Boston, they have a program here. They have programs all over the world. They're actually the world's largest, and I'm a mentor there as well. Awesome. What they do is they put you in contact with the investors. So it is something to be, there's something to be said about saying, hey, I'm a Y Combinator company. Every company that's ever gone through that says we're a Y Combinator company, and that becomes part of their marketing pitch. Absolutely. As if it separates them from the rest of the pack. But that's just the start. After that, when do you stop saying we're a Y Combinator company and actually using your own company name and your own likeness and all that? You know what I mean? And so there is something to be said about that. These organizations, some of my friends have had companies and have had to take a hard look at whether or not they want to go through a Techstars. And there's lots of different programs all over the country and world now where they have different partnerships. Mass Challenge has a Bridge to Mass Challenge program. And I think Techstars, they take 6% of equity. Now, mind you, this is at the earliest stages when equity is all you need, all you have. And what are you getting in exchange for that equity? You're getting mentorship. You're getting access to an exclusive network. You're getting access to other Techstars founders who also have their networks, et cetera. So again, the intangible aspects, I think, are much more important than the investment itself. The investment just establishes a relationship. And it's very important that you take on investors that actually understand your industry. It's not their money, it's their knowledge and their know-how and their network that's really that you're going after. Now, those organizations are powerful. I do think that they have, it's a lot of unique benefits. Of course, I mentor these companies. But I also think that as founders, our equity is the most valuable thing that we have. And so I encourage people to try to find other types of accelerators like Mass Challenge, and because Mass Challenge does not take any equity at all. They're a nonprofit organization funded by donors. Some of the largest donors from around the world donate to them. And they put you in contact with the investors. You're still part of an exclusive network. But it's a different model because they really act as a convener rather than what's effectively a glorified investment fund, right? Not to put down these other organizations, but they effectively are a venture capital fund that cares about mentoring their startups in a way so that they can get a higher return on their investment, which is smart. But it's not for everybody. There might be companies that are earlier stage that are at some point of iterating, and I would encourage them not to take investment because you might not get a return on investment in that way.
Got that. So, in fact, I'm happy within India, we have a lot of ecosystem, a lot of incubators, accelerators that happen a lot, especially in cities like Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, Gurgaon, all of these, right? This is moving at a massive speed here as well. And a lot of people go to these, in incubators so that they get that head start, right? Having said that, I want to understand from a US-India standpoint, right? Founders who's already there in one of these incubators or accelerators within India and want to raise capital from one of these, accelerators from US, right? What should be the approach? How should they go about it?
It's all people-based. It is not your idea. It's not your company. It's not how great your website or your pitch deck is. It's who you know. It's all about who you know. Everyone wants to be part of Y Combinator. You know how low their acceptance rate is. And the companies that do well are those who are able to, work through the channels of companies that have already been accepted. Simple as that. And finding your little crew, whatever that is, finding people, entrepreneurs supporting other entrepreneurs, giving back. This is something that we don't understand. Entrepreneurship thrives on goodwill. It thrives on people helping people because we all share in the same problems. And when things start to break down is when you say, I'm not going to do a favor for you unless you do a favor for me. You have to be willing to pay it forward, and you have to be seen as someone who wants to help. Because then you can really become an aggregator and a leader within your ecosystem as someone who's seen as giving back rather than someone who's just taking. And there's been a lot of examples. In fact, the founder of Techstars is Brad Feld, one of the founders, and I've been inspired greatly by, his mindfulness approach and understanding. He's written many books about what makes startup ecosystems thrive, and one of them is to be, the whole human being and understand that we all share in the world's problems. And as entrepreneurs, we recognize that we are our own support group.
Yeah.
We're all entrepreneurs until we succeed.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's assume a mid-sized company which is already there, running, operating, and want to raise capital. And I'm now looking at someone like a Vanguard or BlackRock.
Sure.
If they want to attract investment from these companies,
Sure.
right? What should be their approach?
In the investment game, there is a supply chain of capital.
Okay.
Okay, angel investors are partly angel investors because they have relationships with VCs, and the smaller VCs have relationships with the larger VCs, and so on and so forth. That's the way the wheel turns. That's the way it is. So no one's going to invest in your company unless they recognize that other follow-on investors are going to join. So they might be unofficial right now, it might be informal, but the fact that you're already talking to them and already are greasing those relationships shows that they're doing the due diligence. They're understanding that, hey, I'm not going to invest in this company unless I can, within a certain timeline, raise more capital. Because the expectation for all these companies isn't just to raise capital and then have that be it. There's usually more rounds. And if you set the expectation with your investors that you're focused on your development strategy and you're reaching your milestones and so on, then they're going to say, okay, well, in order for me to reach the stratosphere, I'm going to have to put not my regular gasoline, I'm going to have to put jet fuel into your rocket ship. You know what I mean? And so they have to know people who sell jet fuel, not just even though a lot of these angel investors and smaller VCs have money to give, these companies like BlackRock and such are behemoths, right?
Yeah. They control the whole economy.
That's
in
right.
fact. Yeah.
That's right. In a lot of ways, they are the big dog, and they are the ones that everyone wants to know those folks. Even to the point where if you are involved in private equity or in investment, just even to do an internship there for do a year stint there is something that's seen as being very, very powerful.
Yeah, I can get that. Yeah. So essentially, to summarize on attracting big names like Vanguard or BlackRock, right? That technically means you have to have a very good relation with your existing investors and understand their relation with these big guys, right? And if you know that these guys have it, then make sure you're not screwing up your relation with the existing investors. Is that right understanding?
You're exactly right. You need to judge yourself by the company that you keep. In a place like Boston, in our venture world, the world's very small. Everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
And the enemy of your enemy isn't necessarily your friend either. Like there's a lot going on there in terms of for me in Boston, I have to be under my best behavior at all times because I'm from Boston. I can't run away. I'm a known quantity. People know where I'm from. They know where my family's from, and I can't run. But if you're not from Boston, you might it works for you in some ways because you're new, you're like a smart person, you're hot, you're developing a great company, but you're not one of us. So who is in your corner vouching for you? Who wants to see you succeed?
Right.
This is something that people try to understand the merit of their idea or even the merit of the traction that they've already had without recognizing that really the world in which we live, the status quo prevails. There's a lot of people out there that are making money off the way the world is right now. So when you develop a business and you're trying to develop revenue, you're inherently taking money out of somebody else's pocket. You already have competition, both directly and indirectly, off the status quo, right? So I think that we need to understand that entrepreneurship is hard to get the ball rolling and to put it, we're pushing uphill until we're pushing downhill, right? And in the early stages, we're pushing up a steep incline. So who is going to help you to push up that hill and get to the top? I don't know. There's no easy answer to this. For every industry, it's different. For every geography, it's different. For every person from the world is very tribal. If you're from India and you're not plugging into first generation Indians in the United States, then I don't think you're doing it right. You need to work within the community in which you already know and the community that already trusts you. And besides, Indians recognize the sacrifice that it took in order to come to the United States. And there are organizations for India in the States like the Indus Entrepreneurs, Thai, that you might be familiar with. In the Boston area, I oftentimes lead my students to go to Thai events because they're like, well, I'm from India, who wants to help me? Plenty of people. There's been many successful Indian people in the United States that are looking for a way to give back, and this is how they do it.
Okay, so if you are in US and Indian and wanting to raise fund or wanting to take any favor, go out to networking and just call out that
Yes.
you're here seeking help, and
Yeah.
there are people who will help.
That's right. The best way to get investment is to ask for advice.
Okay.
The best way to get advice is to ask for investment.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
You need advice, ask for investment. You need investment, ask for advice. Makes sense.
It's kind of it's not direct, but it's the truth.
Yeah. Interesting fact there. Yeah.
And if they give you the advice and you follow their advice, that's very flattering. So if you gave me advice and I followed it and I was like, hey, Pradeep, I did what you said. Thanks, man. You'd be like very flattered. You'd be like, wow, that guy listened to what I said. It shows that there's some trust there.
Right.
That's the first stage, is actually listening to what investors tell you. You can't listen to everybody.
That's a catch. So you build trust, and hence you get the investment from them.
Right.
Makes sense.
You have to show that you're coachable, that you have emotional intelligence, that you're willing to listen to the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship is hard. Most days are bad days, actually. Most days are days where you're not sure what you're going to do next. And if you don't have these kind of people in your corner that are going to tell you about the unknown unknowns of your business. So you have known knowns, you have known unknowns, and you have a lot of unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
And if you think that all the questions that you need to ask are things that you already know to ask, then you're probably wrong. There's probably a lot of other dimensions of your product that it's going to take in order to build even deeper value.
Yeah.
Right? You can deepen your value proposition by asking more difficult questions. Of course, answering questions only brings up questions sometimes, but that's why you need to surround yourself with these people who have more of a more holistic or global understanding of the space.
Yeah.
They can pull strings. They know people you don't know, and their reputation prevails. So why not take advantage of that? After all, we are resourceful entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. In fact, you said entrepreneurship is pretty risky, and I was reading an article other day on LinkedIn. Someone who has given everything for the company that he was working towards, and he has stayed onto it and worked hard towards it, and finally, I don't know what went wrong, couldn't sustain, and he took a step of suicide. And not just himself, he took the whole family along.
Wow.
I was literally so sad reading that article. On one side, we speak of entrepreneurship, it's being glorified a lot. On the other side, when you see and read a story like this, it's pretty sad and heartening there.
This is another reason why at Babson we say that you should always use means at hand. Don't overplay your hand. Don't overspend on a business when it's not going to be sustainable for your life. Remember that in entrepreneurship, at least in the United States, failure is the tuition that you pay for success.
Yeah.
Everything you do prepares you for what you haven't done yet.
Right.
So you can't go in thinking if this doesn't succeed, then my life's going to be over, because the likelihood of you succeeding is very low.
Very, very low.
I like to think about entrepreneurship and career advancement in general as being like running. And in running, it's controlled falling. You're always firmly with one foot on the ground, and then you're reaching to the next thing, the thing that you haven't gotten to yet. And then you firmly on the ground, and then you go to the next thing, and so on and so forth. But if you just want to, move, real small, you can stay in your cubicle for your whole career and take small steps and go nowhere. Right. But us entrepreneurs, I don't know about you, but I've been able to change and morph my career into something else simply because I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm always reaching to do the next thing that I've never done before.
Right.
Using what I already know, but getting to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think people necessarily look at it like that. But you hit on something which I think is going back to this gentleman that you were mentioning. It's super sad, but unfortunately, burnout is a real thing. It's not talked about enough. You would think that successful entrepreneurs, that everything they touched turned to gold, and you only hear about the successes. You don't hear about mindfulness. You don't hear about people. I say all the time that your spouse is your co-founder. Your friends, you need to have a support network. Your spouse, if he or she doesn't support you, through thick and thin, if it's only based on whether or not you're going to be successful, it's not going to work, and that becomes a deeper stress rather than a support network.
Very true. Very true.
Right. And so I can't give enough credit to my wife for being supportive in my entrepreneurial career. It's been a turbulent career for me, and to understand that this is part of the road is something that, setting the expectation and saying, hey, look, I do this because I'm mission oriented and I care about the world in which we live.
Got that. Yeah, I think let's come back to the founders and especially the early stage founders, right? You being a professor at Babson and Textra mentor,
Yeah.
I want to ask this question, right? If somebody's starting, and what are the kind of mistakes that first time entrepreneurs usually do that you see happening a lot?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, number one, they think they need to build something.
Mm-hmm.
And when they build it, they think they need to build their full vision instead of a more rudimentary, low fidelity prototype. You should be able to build your vision using some PowerPoint slides and some, if you're building a physical, representation of it, use cardboard and work your way up from there. This is what shoe companies do when they build prototypes for shoes, like Nike, Adidas, all those companies. This is what they do. So you don't need the money to build your full vision yet. And besides, what you think your vision is not validated anyway. So you need to take small incremental steps using the means that you have. We're talking, stuff that you can get off the shelf, like, cardboard, paper, your slideware that you would normally have. You can show a visual representation of what an app looks like. Of course, also, it's to our advantage that we now have low code and no code solutions that now even non-technical co-founders can build their vision out and show people, hey, this is what, on a very basic level, my idea might look like. If you can't show your idea and people can't give, real true feedback, honest feedback through qualitative and quantitative research, then you don't know if what you're selling really has a market. You don't know if there's going to be product market fit. You don't know if you're going to have traction. So this, I think, is a crucial thing because founders, especially technical co-founders, they want to prove what they can do. And they think they need to build something in order to show how smart they are. But what they need to do is do vaporware. They need to understand that the customers that they're developing, it's all about customer development. Are you providing value? Is this something that you'd pay for? And oftentimes, if you can get a handful of customers to settle upon, your 3 to 5, key features that provide the highest amount of benefit for them, you can group those into an initial group of customers or potential customers, and you can say, look, if I'm able to build a product that has these features, would you buy it? And that's a letter of intent. You can take those letters of intent to an investor, and that is actually as strong as customers, because it shows that you've done all that hard work to understand what it's going to take in order to sell a customer on your product. Right. And then it's a matter of delivering on your promise and your expectation. That ideas and getting started from the beginning is hard, but also companies fail because founders fail, because execution is everything. Right. And speed is everything. And if you're not a oiled machine, if you don't have a good working relationship with your founders, oftentimes companies fail because founders fail.
Yeah. Pretty insightful input there.
Yeah.
Validation of it and speed aligned with sales. These three, if I have to summarize what you said, right?
Yeah.
Validation of the product before you jump in and invest money there, and make sure do it at speed, right? And then make sure you're able to sell that even before you actually invest on it. So that
I want to be clear, it's not pushing your product on people. It's asking questions and getting them to understand that this is something I need. And then you're mapping out what the solution is to what they need. So it's sort of like, again, using your ears and your mouth and understanding that we're building to spec what you want to buy. This never existed prior to me presenting it to you, but you're not going to buy something just because it's off the shelf. Otherwise, you would have Googled it yourself. And besides, this is hard work. If you're going to do something truly novel, then it's not going to be a surface level, easy to solve solution. All the hard problems have been solved. Or all the easy problems have been solved. Now we have the hard problems left. Right? And I think the hard problems are the things that, the reason why is because a lot of the technical co-founders aren't empathetical. They don't know how to connect with the human condition and to be able to get people to trust them and to open up. And really have that emotional resonance that it's going to take for people to trust you and tell you about what the real problem is, the deeper underlying problem. Right. If you're not willing to ask those tough questions, then people are unwilling to share what the solution might be too. Right. It's easier said than done. I mean, this is a blood sport, entrepreneurship.
Right. So let's say someone is building a product and they have US as a target market, right? Especially from India or Southeast Asia, if they're building in, right? What advice would you have for these people? US as a potential market and they're starting from India or Southeast Asia.
Again, I would work through intermediaries. I would find folks through your own network that you think that you can trust, who might be maybe on a retainer or maybe on a small a small monthly budget to act on your behalf in the United States. You really do need boots on the ground there, both from a development perspective, but also from a front office perspective, because you need to develop those relationships. You need to get your brand out there. You need partnerships and people that that understand the intricacies and the intangible aspects of what it means to be in that ecosystem. A lot of folks think when they come to Boston and they go to the Silicon Valley, they think what they see is what they're getting. There's something very, very, very valuable beneath the surface in both of those ecosystems that they know that the world doesn't know. And that's something that you're never going to be able to understand that unless you have somebody who you're joined up with, who represents your ideals and to help usher you to come to the United States. It's not going to be a straightforward path. It's going to be something where the folks that you trust are going to be able to again, you're new, you're from another continent, and there's going to be a mistrust there before there's trust, and it's going to take a lot longer than what you think. So don't come to the United States, because if you do come to the United States on your own, it's going to be very expensive for you. The cost of doing business there is much more expensive. The noise there is more expensive. Yes, you will have the face time to these people, and that does benefit substantially. You'll probably have to get on a plane and come to the United States to meet with them for big deals, but it's still cheaper than establishing an office and establishing actually an LLC or even a C Corp. Because you don't even know if what you're doing is something that's going to provide value yet. Right. At some point, that consultant or advisor that you work with has to actually be paid. And this is a problem for me in my career and in my consultancy, because I want to work with companies oftentimes that have no money. They are hot. They're something that's could have potential benefit, but they don't have any money yet. And so what they're often trying to offer is maybe equity. In a company that is somewhere else, and that's worth nothing to me. My credit card company doesn't care that I'm advising companies for free. They care about me paying them, right? So these are some of the issues associated with cross-border development and sort of soft landing or market entry. That's why I developed with my firm MassNext, I developed a subscription package where they pay a monthly fee, and much lower than your typical retainer. The folks who do this kind of work in Boston anyway, they get paid quite well. And it's feast and famine, because sometimes you have a company that you meet and they do have some funding and they are able to pay you, but they always think, oh, it's going to happen within like 3 to 5 months. Right. If you're not there and nobody knows you, it's going to take at least a year. It's always going to take a lot longer, at least twice as long as what you think. Right. Even though you're working through these intermediaries. And the last thing I'm going to say is you need to trust these intermediaries. After all, you're not hiring them to sell. You're hiring them to market. And by marketing, what I mean is not selling. What I mean is positioning a value proposition that you haven't built yet. You're listening to what these people are getting from the stakeholders, because those stakeholders are telling you what they're willing to pay for. So stop pushing what you're selling and stop blaming that intermediary for not being able to sell good enough, or not, oh, you said that you had the greatest network. Well, I introduced you to everybody in that network, and you know what they told me? They told me that your product isn't novel. Right. So you should be paying me for that, because I just saved your entire life. You didn't have to move your family over here to find out in the very sobering reality that your baby is actually ugly. Right. Right. And that's something that is worth a lot of money for a consultant to be able to do that kind of market research effectively for you, without having any expectation that this is going to be the next big rocket ship that's going to go off into space.
Got that. So here, Robert, I always, when I think of it, right, let's say if I want to offer Power Your Best, that's my company, service out in US, right? How do I go about it, right? Meaning, how do I find the right intermediary? You just spoke about it. Don't directly, establish your office there. You identify an intermediary first, right? I don't know. How do I trust? How do I select someone?
This is hard. This is a problem for Indians, because you want to trust and there are certain groups, like for example Gujarati Indians, that have relationships on both sides, and there's a large Gujarati population in the United States. They know they can trust each other. They speak the same language and so on, and so there's a cultural element there. Okay. And it's all about what can you do to build trust. That's part of the reason why I'm here. I could send out, I blast you with emails. We could connect on LinkedIn. We could have great Zoom calls, but it's not the same as when we're here and we're like actually pressing flesh and we're actually like meeting each other. I get to experience the great weather and the culture and everything.
Right.
It speaks volumes about what I'm willing to do and to invest in you. And so I think that's what you should do is there should be some skin in the game. That other person, that other consultant or whomever they are, it's not just about their knowledge at a surface level, it's also what their intent is and what their motivation is for helping you. And also you need to recognize how many other customers are they working with? How scalable is the attention that you're getting from them? If things start to take off and they have 5 other customers, they're going to be like, sorry, I don't have any time. Or what kind of constraints do they have?
Right.
Is there an expectation that if things do succeed that they're going to take over and have a leadership role? There should be. Like if I was working with an Indian company and I was able to make a lot of great introductions to a pharma company, they better make me the head of something. And that's not in their best interest to just pay me off for my small consultant and that's always been my goal, is to do this kind of work and maybe find some company that I fall in love with and join their company on a more regular basis. There's also fractional executives. So there's people that will work like 1 day a week. They'll be like the head of sales for you 1 day a week. And sometimes these people are executives of Fortune 500 companies. They have the kind of clout and the kind of reputation where they can say, I'm going to be Monday I'm the CEO of this company, Tuesday I'm the CEO of that company, and so on, right? And those people are valuable, but they're expensive. Because they are a known quantity. They're people who have already had exits.
Right.
And you want somebody on your team that's had exits before, but they know how valuable they are, so they charge accordingly.
Get that. So from that standpoint, I want to now move into a zone where, let's say I'm still starting or I'm in the very early stage, I'm still figuring out, I'm okay to pivot now, right? And understand what are the opportunities in US, if I'm in India, building in, what are the opportunities? I'm still flexible, right? And I can pivot basis the opportunity that's there, right? So what are the opportunities out in US if you're building from India?
From India, the opportunity is basically that you can build something for pennies on the dollar compared to what it's going to cost to build in the United States. Your dev team, your research and development team should be here. You should take advantage of the skill set that you have here. It does not benefit you to move there and to have to deal with the United States labor market, which is a mess, and it's very competitive and it's somewhat inflated. The same person here can live real well for less money than what it costs to go to the United States. It's not always better in the United States either. Just because we have more money, everything costs more. A lot of Indian people go to the United States, they stay there for a few years and they go, I don't like this, and they go home. Right? And so there's definite advantages to being in India, but I do think that when it comes to the actual market that you're serving, you want to have the largest market. You want to be able to charge the most that you can as a business person. As a business owner, the cost of doing business in the United States is very, very expensive. So this is you have to find a way to combine the best of both worlds to take advantage of the prowess that you have here while being able to plug into the larger market opportunity. Both because everything costs more in the United States. We're pretty loose with our cash. We don't save. Indians should be taking advantage of this, man. You should be looking yourselves in the mirror and go, we save money, but Americans don't. Let's go after them right now. Because we have money in our pockets and you're going to get it from us if you understand this. Right. I do think there's something there about the resilience and the grittiness of Indians, and it's not just Indians. It's Europeans are very frugal as well. Germans are very, very frugal as well. They analyze everything forever before they finally actually make a decision. It doesn't mean that they don't have money to spend. It just means that they're very frugal with it. So it's actually mostly just the United States that's loose with our cash, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the availability of credit. Tomorrow's always going to be a brighter day. We've had a couple depressions, but we haven't really been shocked in the way that many countries have, where there were dark days. Most of us immigrant families, when they move to the United States, they say, look, do you know how hard we had to work and the kinds of things that we had to endure as a people for us to have the opportunity to come to the United States? The way to win is to save money, and the way to win is to build value and to be your own boss. You even see people from the Middle East who have come from nothing They work at a franchise when they first come over. We're talking McDonald's and these kinds of places. And then within a few years, them and their friends, they're investing in a franchise. And part of the reason why they do that is because they might not be able to pronounce their names or recognize where they're from in the world, but everyone knows what McDonald's is. Yeah. And so when you look at many of these different chains and different franchises, a lot of times they're immigrant owners of these people because they understand the pathway to the American experience.
Get that.
Right. And, there's a lot of folks, we've been talking about tech entrepreneurship. There's a lot of, I'm not going to call it lower end or less sophisticated, but it's still quite valuable. Things like trucking, things like distribution, things like gas stations. These are valuable things that as a foreigner, you come in and you go, wow, Americans spend a lot of money on this stuff. I'm going to open up a string of gas stations and I'm going to charge, X amount of money for the goods and stuff inside the store. And you can make money off a convenience store inside. And then they add a chain. And this has become part of the American story. So, entrepreneurship doesn't have to be the bleeding edge of technology. It can also be understanding just needs and wants and logistics and location. Right. I don't know if necessarily people, no one moves to the United States in order to start a gas station. But I'll tell you, the people who started successful gas station, now they have, big garages full of cars and everything. And they're like, hey, look, now I've made it. So you don't necessarily need to have something that is totally new. Sometimes your hard work and your dedication can be the differentiator. And that's another area where I think Indians can absolutely give Americans a run for our money because you work so damn hard. You work longer hours and more days than us.
Got that.
And so, pound for pound, I think you do higher quality work when it comes down to it. And as an entrepreneur, that's again one of the reasons why I'm here. I want to work with Indians to add value to my economy.
Get that. Robert, we spoke on the opportunity at large, right? On the other side, we see artificial intelligence is taking, the whole limelight, I call it, right? Talk of the town.
Sure.
From a life sciences context, how is artificial intelligence, shaping this whole, area of life sciences?
Sure. Well, artificial intelligence is nothing new. We've had decision support tools and machine learning for a while now, for over a decade.
Sure.
What we're starting to understand, though, is the efficiencies that can create and the opportunities that can create by not doing many of these mundane, menial tasks that are quite expensive and prone to human error.
Right.
So anything like that's might be a very expensive procedure or a test or some sort of scan, but really what artificial intelligence should do is free up your time so that you can do more of this, more actual interfacing with people, and that's what's missing from medicine.
Okay.
Right. And so there's medical errors, there's clinical trial recruiting, there's engagement, there's patient experience, there's so many different ways that you can unpack AI.
Right.
But what we should be talking about is actual intelligence that we get from this. How is this freeing up our time so that in terms of talking about big data. Big data isn't really about big data. It's really about small data. It's really about what you do now. Right. And in fact, mo data, mo problems. So really what we need to be doing is thinking about contextualizing AI. When companies pitch their company, for example, they shouldn't pitch themselves as AI company. They should pitch themselves as a company that solves an industry problem using AI behind the scenes. AI is just part of their execution strategy. But too often they say we're an AI company. And what you've done is you've commoditized yourself. You don't want to become a commodity. You want to become something that provides value beyond the data.
So essentially what you're saying is, sorry to interrupt, if I'm an AI company and if I'm pitching to an investor or anyone out there in the ecosystem, you basically are saying that don't pitch yourself as an AI company and, AI should not be the part of the pitch. Is that what you're trying to say?
When you mention how you're solving the problem, you can say, yeah, we use AI. And only now are they saying, yeah, we use AI. In the past, they were like, yeah, we use data crunching, we use analysis. But now the shorthand for that is we have AI. Well, what makes your AI? You've just now undercut yourself because did you build your own AI engine? What's your algorithm there? Like, what's your inputs there? How unique is that? But if what you're doing is using that information in order to solve problems that are valuable problems, then now you have something. Now it's a hinge to get somewhere versus just selling the AI off the shelf like it's a commodity. I don't think entrepreneurs are doing themselves any good. And I know why they do this, because they know that AI is hot, and they've heard that if you don't mention AI, then you're not going to get investment and so on and so forth. Understood. But they're also selling themselves short. They need to understand that they're an AI company within an industry. You're not in the AI industry. AI is not an industry. It's a component that helps you to get to solving problems that have been inherent in our industry forever. Right. And so, if anything, this should free up a lot of our time to do a lot of the harder, more interpersonal work that doctors need to do, versus being seen as being like an auto mechanic. They should be seen as being a trusted advisor, right? And that only happens because they're going to have more time to spend with patients, not less.
Interesting. I see this happening a lot, in fact, when the new age companies pitch in, they try to position themselves as an AI company, and the focus on the problem kind of gets shadowed by AI a lot.
Yeah. You even see investors that invest in AI. It's almost like this gets turned around, where they're looking for you to pitch yourself like AI. And it's like, wait, those investors don't even understand the context of what we're talking about right now. Right? It's like they're investing in table stakes instead of investing in what's beyond the horizon. If you get what you get when it comes to expectations. And if they're looking for a company to pitch themselves as AI, there's 900 companies out there right now that are pitching them. But how many of those companies are saying, well, hold up now, how is AI being used within the context of the problem that I'm solving, and then having services attached to that?
Makes sense. So Robert, I want to ask this question, right? You were speaking about the 4 pillars earlier, before we actually started shooting, right?
Yeah.
In the offline conversation.
Yeah.
I want to bring in the offline conversation onto the air, and I want you to speak about the 4 pillars that you were mentioning earlier.
I'm proud to be from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we are recognized as the global leaders in life science. And this didn't happen by accident, it happened by design. Our government worked with academia and industry and philanthropy to align the incentives, because rising tides lifts all boats. So I'll begin by saying, academia, what do they care about? Well, they care about knowledge creation. They care about maybe their ego of what they publish and how they're seen within their academic community. Industry, we know what they care about. They care about profit and getting the product out to market and returning profit to their investors and so on and so forth.
Right.
Government, they care about votes. When they get behind policies that create economic vitality, it usually is a good thing for them, and that usually ensures that they stay in power.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, we wrote this playbook back in the 1990s when we dropped $1 billion into the biotech ecosystem. And it was very important as part of this strategy to include a communication strategy that helps the other stakeholders understand what's in it for them. Right? It wasn't always that way. When biotech first came out in Boston, the government was spreading some falsehoods about the dangers, fish being born with 3 eyes in the Charles River in Boston, and actually we repelled a lot of biotech companies because there was a misunderstanding about ethics.
Okay.
But the fourth pillar, patient advocacy, comes into play, because high net worth individuals are actually the lifeblood of the life science ecosystem. And the reason why is because even though they have a lot of money and they donate a lot of money to different organizations, hospitals, nonprofit organizations, et cetera, they still suffer from many of the same health conditions that non-wealthy people do. So within philanthropy, this is not a very well understood discipline, because most of us have not grown up in these kinds of families and so on and so forth. But once I feel very fortunate that I've been mentored by some of the folks within the Boston ecosystem that have become at the forefront of this revolution. And the example that I'm going to talk about is Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Vertex is a company that has had enormous success with cystic fibrosis, which is a rare orphan disease that is very, very problematic for the patients involved. They have to do a breathing treatment and a therapy that they spend sometimes more than a third of their lives isolated from everyone, and as they do their treatment. And they live in a constant fear of whether or not they're being adherent to what their physician prescribes. And so this was a childhood disease back not too long ago with a life expectancy of only 7 years old. But through the efforts of patient advocacy organizations like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, they were able to create a model that has revolutionized the way that I look at patient advocacy, the way I look at business, and here's why. The founder of Vertex, his name is Josh Boger. I think he understood that this was going to be a difficult development path. Even though he had a lot of confidence in his product and what they were doing, they recognized that they needed to have trust with the community that they served. And on the other side, there was a gentleman, rest in peace, an amazing human being, Joel O'Donnell. And I get choked up because I know that his son, Joey, he founded the Joey Fund. His son passed away. And so he was, I think, one of the richest people in Massachusetts, and his son passed away, and he recognized that if they didn't do something different, then everybody else's kids would pass away too. And he said, look, you can keep doing these fundraising, bake sales, little dollars here and there, or we can do something drastically different. And what he did was he aligned with they weren't called Vertex at the time, but he partnered with them. And I don't know what that contract looked like, but they collaborated in a way that's never been done before.
Look at that.
When they collaborated, the Vertex was able to get positive drug data on one of their drugs, and then because the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation had a cut of that deal, they were able to sell their stock, and they made $3.3 billion off a patient population of only 30,000 people in the United States, roughly. So why aren't all the communities of the world doing this? Because not all the communities of the world have the kinds of people behind them that cystic fibrosis did. Right. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that disproportionately affects people who are Ashkenazi Jewish and people who are Irish. There's probably no city in the world other than Boston where these two communities can come together for a common good. And I'm just so proud to be from Boston to be able to tell this tale, because I feel like this is something that the whole world should know. It was never about just scientific innovation. It was always about alleviating pain and suffering for patients. Behind the scenes, the people who understood this were the high net worth individuals. They represented the ideals and the hopes and dreams and the fears of regular people. Right. They understood the role that they had to play, and they understood that they had to go to bat for these people, because if they weren't willing to take risks and do something different, then they would have these families would have faced the same peril as Joe O'Donnell's son did. And I should say that there's 7,000 different rare diseases. Most have no therapy and no cure. 3/4 of those are childhood diseases. Right. So what we're really talking about is what is it going to take in order to gain the trust of patients and families so that we can administer experimental drugs to their children. There's a drug, here, take it, put it, inject your child with this drug. That's really hard to do. Yeah. I've the pharmaceutical industry behind oil and natural gas and maybe financial services is probably like one of the least trusted industries in the world. Right. The costs are super, super high. Yeah. But in cystic fibrosis, what they showed was that with the proper stakeholder analysis, they can do anything. And so I'm waiting for part of my reason for why I'm in India is to discover another Vertex Pharmaceuticals, help them come to the United States and alleviate pain and suffering for patients who suffer from that disease.
Got that. This was quite heavy.
I'm emotional.
Yeah.
It's something that emotion should drive this. We are human beings. Business is important, but it's a resource to us. Right. People could complain about the pharmaceutical industry. They could complain about the cost of doing business, but when you position it the right way, that profit becomes another motivation. That's why you have to understand the 4 pillars of the ecosystem. Yeah. It's not just about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. It's because there's incentives.
You're essentially saying academia, government, industry as a whole, philanthropy, or the HNIs, people who fund it. Yeah. These are the 4 pillars which come together and sort of help the innovation on life sciences side.
Exactly.
Is it what you're saying?
Exactly. Right? Exactly. And I would say that the playbook is a little bit elusive for most people. Back in the 1980s into the 1990s, we developed a communication strategy to talk about only 3 pillars. Academia, industry, and government. The 4th pillar was not really something that was ever mentioned because it was highly misunderstood. Yeah. But when I got involved in my first venture, which was in cystic fibrosis, I collaborated with a group in Boston and Cambridge called the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council. Anyone who is developing anything in life sciences needs to go to massbio.org, and they need to check out this organization because they are the biggest in the world of doing what they do, and they can help you to understand how to do this kind of stakeholder analysis. Again, it's not about developing the next generation of drugs. It's about engaging the proper stakeholders so that they want to see you win. These are people who are the highest net worth people in they might have made their money through any other means, but they suffer with this disease and they want to see you succeed because they feel the pain firsthand. They want to leave behind a legacy.
Get that.
And Joe O'Donnell definitely left behind a legacy.
This was quite heavy, Robert. Yeah. At this stage, I want to ask you one question. You traveled across, whether it is for academia or for your work, right? What I understood from your profile or reading about you, you've traveled to Oman, Spain, India, you're here, and across US, you know the markets, right? And any other country which I'm not referring to, maybe you can call it out on the track.
Europe in general, yeah.
Europe in general.
There's, really what I care about are the hot biotech ecosystems of the world that have something to offer us in Boston. Most of our companies are from elsewhere.
Yeah.
So really the opportunity is to help build bridges.
Right. So the question that I'm trying to understand is your observation on the overall ecosystem that you've traveled, all these countries, Europe, India, Spain, Oman, UAE as a whole, right? Where do you see that most of the life sciences innovation is happening?
Where do I see it happening? The innovation is happening in Europe, and it's happening in the United States. There are some quite large organizations in Europe as well. Novartis and Roche, for example. Switzerland is way more developed than what people realize when it comes to life sciences. They have established Swissnex, which Swissnex actually has an office here. I think they're in Mumbai. And they are the innovators of a new discipline called science diplomacy. Science diplomacy is all about understanding that we need to engage in discourse about problems that we all suffer from. And so rather than overtly just selling their companies, what they have is an innovation agency called InnoSwiss. And they kick in half the money, and then the other half of the money, or another substantial part of the money, comes from those big companies like Novartis and Roche, who stand to gain from those insights.
Okay.
Because what they're doing is convening all kinds of subject matter experts, events, panel discussions, incubator accelerator programs, et cetera, and then those insights find their way back to the mothership.
Get that.
And so they're much longer term in their perspective than the kind of short-term perspective that we have in the United States. And in general, there's in Switzerland and Germany, there's a high respect, I think, that the world has for science and engineering from those countries. German engineering is important. And it's also important to mention the top-selling drug in the world, Humira, was originally a German company.
Okay.
So we have a lot of respect for those ecosystems as well. There's, with regard to medical devices, Germany is also really large. They rival us. So I think there's more than meets the eye with some of these ecosystems. And as a whole, though, most of these, even in Germany and Switzerland, there's only a limited amount of funding, and eventually those companies need to come to the United States. So that's the direction. All roads lead to the United States when it comes to biotech. Not only because of the funding, but also because of the size of the market and how much you can charge. Many of the European economies have capped. So I mentioned Vertex Pharmaceuticals before. It's not available in many countries because it's too expensive.
Okay.
These are expensive, what we call designer drugs that take a while for them to go off label and become generics before finally the masses are able to get it. Right. And so in many ways, that's why places like India and Africa and South America haven't seen much development, because investors perceive that they don't stand to gain much because the prices are lower. How do you scale? There's a lot of issues there. In the United States, the prices are really high, for everything. And so that's bad for customers, it's bad for individuals and consumers, but it's good for business, for return on investment. So yeah, that's what they want you to do. In terms of, the opportunity though, is intangible. The opportunity isn't just about the market, it's about talents. It's about the insights that we can deliver to the folks that we have in our ecosystem that aren't from the United States. Maybe it's doing a postdoc in Boston, understanding what we're doing, and then going back to their country and innovating from within. That could be something, it doesn't matter what the country is in the earth. That could be something, anyone could come from somewhere and go back to their home country and really do something special based on the insights that they gain from the United States. It's not all about the economic motive. It's not all about, where the company's coming from and how much can investors make. It's also, how are we planting a seed and inspiring hope for people to be part of something that's truly innovative, where they can have a big impact on the world.
Right.
That could come from anywhere. And so, eventually we're going to see more companies coming from other places in the world. I spent some time in Oman. I know they have a sovereign fund. They have a 2040 vision plan. Of course, these countries have, oil reserves, and that allows them to be able to do this kind of thing. And so I think we shouldn't ignore those countries, because they are poised to want to collaborate. And I will also mention that Bahrain and Oman have free trade agreements with the United States, which provides another lucrative incentive for American companies to want to do business there, because they don't face the same level of taxation and they can jump through a bunch of loopholes. And it also gives us maybe another opportunity, another friend in the Middle East that we can depend on.
Okay.
Right? We have a long-standing history with Oman that actually goes all the way back to George Washington. People don't know this, and it starts on the open seas when the Commonwealth, the colony of Massachusetts, had our own boats going around the world doing commerce, and we met up with the Omanis and we struck a deal with them.
Okay.
That's where that comes from. So some of these nations haven't actually blossomed yet. We haven't been able to see what they're truly capable of, because frankly, there haven't been intermediaries who can travel back and forth to help decipher and decode the communication, the expectations, the culture, and really reconcile the two economies to understand how we can align and make money off of it.
All right.
It's seen as being a competitive thing, like either here or there. But what about both collaborating and collaboration, and both of them, receiving the incentives? I think that's something that we don't think about, like a mixed company where half the people are here and half of the people are there.
Right.
Rising tides lift all boats, and the more that we are able to collaborate with these ecosystems, the more they're going to plug into us, the more we're going to understand them. Maybe it starts out with tourism. It started out that way for me with India. I came here just to see what it was all about, and I was quickly inspired to do something here.
All right. On the biotech or sciences side, right? We are in Hyderabad, sitting in Hyderabad. Hyderabad itself is a hub of a lot of pharma.
Yep.
A lot of innovation happening on that side. We have a dedicated space where we call it Pharma City, and that's going to be the big hub for the globe, rather, as we move forward. Yeah,
that's amazing. I think that's what you've got to do. And really, the role in Boston, the role of the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council has become well known throughout the country.
Right.
There's other biotech councils like Biocom in California. Every state now has its own version of what MassBio does, because every state recognizes that the role of lobbying and the role of government, and that you have to have the support of the patient advocacy community in order to advocate with the FDA and have your product passed, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I'm looking forward to sharing more with India, because as far as I know, I'm not aware of an authority like a MassBio type of organization here, and I really think it would benefit the Indian economy to have one. I've also talked to Oman about this. I've also talked to, Spain has one called Assay Bio, which is similar to that. It's important that they understand this playbook that I mentioned earlier with the 4 pillars, so that you can identify who those pillars are here too. It would be transformative for the economy to be able to approach it in this way, rather than forcing business people to kind of duke it out on their own without the support of government advocacy and the medical community.
Makes sense. I think we are moving towards the end of the podcast, and a couple of last closing questions, right? If you were, if you get an opportunity, let's say if you get an opportunity to, pick up founding team, right? And you have an option of 3 countries to pick up from. Which 3 countries will you pick up from, and what skill set will you expect from these people?
Wow. Okay, so Americans are the best storytellers in the world. We were very, opening doors, traveling places. We tend to be, liked in that way, and that's why, marketing and business development wise, we tend to do pretty well. So you got to have an American on the team. You also have to have a strong technical person. And I think that could come from anywhere in Asia, but here we are in India, and especially within biotech, I know that there's an opportunity to plug many of the tech folks here into our ecosystem. Not to mention, I enjoy coming here, and I like to do business with places where I like to go. And that's an important thing. It's not always about dollars and cents. It's also about the overall quality of life. So here I do think it's a good quality of life, and you have amazing talent, and you know that you have just vast reserves of smart people here. Right. So you've got to have an Indian on the group, and then the third you probably have to have a European on the group. That person would probably represent a strong market there, maybe Switzerland or Germany, one of those that can help to keep Boston honest. Because we also have a lot of Europeans in our ecosystem as well.
Okay.
So maybe German, maybe Swiss or maybe even Dutch, someone like that. There's been some companies that have been founded in Switzerland where they did this, where they actually had some of their executives were from different countries, and they understood the dream team that they needed to have, right? There's lots of ways, lots of reasons to have, your business in other countries. Mexico, we haven't talked about. South America, we haven't talked about. Australia, we haven't talked about. Yeah. So there's lots of different ecosystems around the world that for personal reasons, people might like that area. I love India, so I want an Indian on my team.
That sounds good. So we spoke of Australia, Mexico, South America, right? I want to ask this question. What are the underrated hubs from a startup standpoint? Let's exclude US and India for now.
Yeah. Spain.
Okay.
Spain is, a very low cost of doing business, very high quality of life. People there work, they're motivated when they work. The scientific community there is strong.
Okay.
Physicians there do not get paid anywhere near what they are in the United States. So there's really a hunger to do something more. Okay. And I do believe that I also do a lot of work. I'll be going to Spain again in the near future, and I often speak on panels at big events there, and I tell them the same thing, which is, if Spain did business how Real Madrid or one of their football or soccer teams does business, they would be global giants, right? But there's not the same emphasis on business there because they do come from a socialist country. So there are some problems there, but in terms of the sheer talent and the opportunities, and also the history that we have with the United States, don't forget that Spanish is also an American language now. I speak Spanish because I recognize that I can use it every day. And so in that way, Spain has a long-standing history with the United States. We're very familiar with them, and I see them as being a contender. Yeah, there's other countries in the world that I think, Korea is another one, that they are pushing the limit. They're doing a lot of great work in Boston. There's constantly events with Korea, and they're, in terms of their hard work and their dedication, they also work really hard. So. It's our responsibility in the United States to usher in the next generation of businesses, and that requires a thoughtfulness and a history, and to build rapport that you have to be able to deliver the truth to people, and oftentimes Americans are quick to tell people things. I'm very direct. In Boston, right. We're known as being very, very direct, and I'm probably even more direct than that, because life is too short. Right. Tick tock, like today's going to be over soon, and if we don't get to the bottom of this quick, then we're not going to be able to solve this problem.
Right.
One of the things that drives me crazy is the complacency that people have with the level of failure that we have in this space, and I'm not, because I recognize that lives are being held in the balance.
Right. One idea or book that changed your thinking towards entrepreneurship?
There's a book by Jeffrey Busgang called Mastering the VC Game. Jeffrey Busgang is a venture capitalist in Boston. also a Harvard Business School professor, who really broke it down about how you need to work with investors, how you can build trust with them, what they're really looking at. And it's really changed the way that I build ventures, because it's helped me to understand customer discovery, traction, when is the appropriate time, how to maintain control. Because it is about control. It is about how much equity you have and that sort of thing. And Jeff does a really excellent job. He was also one of the investors of one of the startups where I used to work. So I knew I could see it play out in practice, and the startup was very successful, and we had a successful exit. So that's one. And then the other one is Venture Deals.
Okay.
Venture Deals was written by Brad Feld, who is the founder of Techstars. And he also, many entrepreneurs have no idea about finance. We're like, oh, we'll hire someone else to do that. But if you don't have a grasp of understanding about your own business, it's sending a message to your venture capitalist that you don't think that's important enough.
Right.
And that's really all that should be important to you, is how to evaluate the value of your business. How do you communicate? It's not just numbers, it's storytelling with numbers. And if you don't understand your numbers, then you don't understand your story either. You don't understand the implications of your actions. So I think those two books together have helped me to understand how to build ventures, how to advise, and also how to make connections within the investment community.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. I think, Robert, we are coming to the end and the last question of it. If anybody want to get, or get to you or reach out to you, whether it is for MaxNext or whether it is for Babson, how can they reach out to you?
Oh, well, there's always my emails, which is rschultz@babson.edu or rschultz@massnext.com. But probably the fastest way to get a hold of me is my LinkedIn.
All right.
I have a very common name. There's a lot of other Robert Schultzes out there. So write Robert Schultz Babson or Robert Schultz Boston, you'll probably find me on there. Awesome. And I'm a very open networker. There's no such thing as strangers, only friends you haven't made yet.
Right. Thank you for coming onto the show, Robert. I think the conversation was quite insightful. A lot of things which I didn't knew, I got to learn from you.
You're the man, Pradeep. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for watching this episode till then. If you found this video informative, do hit the like button, share your feedback in the comment section, and share this with someone who you think this will be of use. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.